All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll be starting right now. Welcome, and thank you for joining the Human Factor, Critical Elements for Cybersecurity and Success. My name is Victor Liu. I'm president of LinkAI Technologies. My portion is going to be very brief. We're very fortunate to have Eric Cron from KnowBe4. KnowBe4 has been our partner in security awareness training since the beginning. KnowBe4 is actually our sole provider of security awareness training. And as most of our clients know, LinkAI offers or puts or requires KnowBe4 in all our managed services agreements now. It's a requirement just because security awareness training is required in all cyber insurance and all compliance. So we've decided that if it's a requirement for nearly everyone, we're just going to put it in our solutions. A little bit about LinkAI. We're located in Florham Park. We've been around for more than 3 decades. We provide IT and cybersecurity services to small, mid-sized businesses in the tri-state area and beyond. I'm not going to read the slide, but these are some of the services we offer. It's managed IT and cybersecurity. IT and cybersecurity are intertwined now. There's no such thing as I have an IT company, but I have someone else do cybersecurity. You can have specialists to do security, and we partner with specialists to do penetration tests, certain compliance. If you have CMMC or DFARS, we'll bring in an expert for that. But we provide a full service IT and cybersecurity. Some of the industries we work with is manufacturing and distribution, nonprofits, medical and healthcare, government and financial services. And I'm going to introduce Eric Cron. He's going to go over the human factor critical elements for cybersecurity success. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to LinkAI. And if you have questions to Eric, we'll certainly pass along to him. Thank you, Eric.
All righty. Well, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to get my screen sharing going on here. All right. So, yeah, as was mentioned, we've been a partner with LinkAI we've been a partner for, long time as I understand it. Here's what I want to do with this. This is a small enough group. I think I'm going to be able to react very well to questions or comments or anything like that. What I'd like you to do, though, is let's put the questions in the Q&A section there. And at the end, we're going to go ahead and come back around to that. Now, the purpose of this talk, the purpose of this session is really to help you understand the human factor of cyber. Now, I've been doing this since back in the 1990s. I hate to say that. I have earned my gray hair, I think, but yeah, got started eons ago, decades ago in IT and security, and kind of been doing this for a while now. And throughout my career, I've noticed a lot of things. First of all, I'm a tech guy. I really am. I'm kind of a geek. I have little single board computers on my desk over here. I mean, that's my thing. I love it. I've never been more happy than when I was in a server room and it's the whir of fans and no other humans. That's where I live. But in my career, I found that what caused me a lot of issues, a lot of the ways that cyber attacks became successful, seemed to always focus on the human side. Technology is great, but we've got to tackle the human side. It's not always easy. I know a lot of people who are in this field. We join this field because we're not necessarily always drawn to training, education, behavior management, things like that. Stuff like you see in HR or marketing or PR. Those are the folks that really love that side. We tend to be the technical folks, but it's just too important to let go. And that's one of the things I love about KnowBe4 is we really strive to make it as easy as possible, even for the technical people. But what I want to help us understand here today is a little bit of why this is such a big deal with the adversaries, with the bad actors out there, and why it's so successful, and kind of how everything fits in our security stack as it is. Now, again, my name is Eric Cron. I've done this for a while. I was the security manager at the U.S. Army 2nd Regional Cyber Center, Western Hemisphere. We did the network infrastructure across all of North America, tying together all the post-camp stations, Army bases across the U.S., helped deploy their Active Directory, all kinds of interesting stuff. And again, I saw some pretty interesting things while we did that. Fun fact, I was also frontline phone support for Windows 95, if y'all can remember back in those days. Know before, we've got, I think it's actually over 65,000 customers now. And what's cool is I've been here for almost 8 years. It'll be 8 years, gosh, next month. I can't believe it. But I've been talking to customers. I've been talking to people in general in the cyber community about this for quite a while now. And with this 65,000 customers, I've met a lot of people who have told me what's worked for them, what's not. We tend to learn from that. Now, we're going to look especially at social engineering here. You know, I say phishing, but phishing is becoming one of those broad terms. We used to always say phishing, and we knew that we were talking about email. But there's some things now. There's vishing, there's smishing, there's even quishing, I think, which is QR code stuff. Insane. We're very clever, us technical people, in how we name these things. So we took phishing and then we slapped a V on it for voice phishing or vishing, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to talk about why it's so effective. We're going to talk about defending ourselves. I'm planning on doing about 45 minutes here, or ending up at around 2:45, or yeah, in about 30 something minutes near, that's 2:45 in my time zone. Then we're going to give it that time for Q&A. But let's start off here. Let's look at phishing, and we will look at the email phishing thing to begin with. And here's the thing. Something that a lot of people don't realize is just how prolific this problem is. There's about 6.4 billion fake emails sent out every single day. That is a huge, huge number. Now, what's nice is we have technology in place to prevent that from getting through. And I got to tell you, email filters have come a long, long way. We're deploying AI in a lot of these. I mean, these are things that really need to happen because of the sheer volume. If not, we would just be completely overwhelmed with the junk that we get in our emails. Now, the problem with this is even the best filters, even the best security controls, they end up letting through about 3 to 5%, which seems like a low number when you're talking about the sheer volume, the 6.4 billion. But here's what we got to remember about this is that 3 to 5% that gets through is actually higher quality than all the stuff that's getting blocked. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? We are blocking most of the commodity stuff. We're blocking a lot of the stuff that is able to be spotted, but the really good stuff is what's going to get past the filters. It just makes sense. What that means is the people on the other side of that, the targets, are going to be exposed to actually higher quality phishing emails and different social engineering attacks than it used to be before the filters were there. But we're knocking down that volume. Otherwise, people would get nothing done all day. So something to remember, what's getting through is the good stuff. Now, some of the stuff that we talk about when we talk about phishing, especially, is business email compromise. This is a big one for organizations, and it's kind of an umbrella term. It's also known by the term CEO fraud in other countries. It just depends. It doesn't mean that they're going after the CEO to commit fraud. It means that they're using potentially the CEO's authority to commit fraud within the organization. Generally, what that means is anyone with authority. It could be CIO, CFO, I mean, depending on your structure, executive director, anyone with authority. Some of the most common ones we see are wire transfer fraud. That's a big one. That's a huge one. And it happens all over the place. There's also W-2 fraud, which generally happens towards the beginning of the year when tax stuff is going on. So this is where the bad actors are actually trying to get in there. And they're trying to get somebody to give them all the W-2s for the organization. I've seen it happen. I've been targeted with this before and just barely got lucky and didn't end up a victim of this. But what they do is then they take the W-2s from all the employees and they go out and they file the taxes on their behalf. And lo and behold, everybody gets a refund that year, right? When the employees go to then file taxes, they find out it's already been done. And that just opens up a whole can of worms. It's a nightmare with the IRS to do this. Now, my personal experience with this was the company I was at before I was the security and compliance lead. And we had a gal come and she called me one day. She said, okay, I got something here from the president of the company. It's asking for some W-2s. She said, you know what? It just seems a little odd. I'm probably wasting your time, but I don't know. It just feels weird for me. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Let's go check this out. And I went over to their desk and I looked at it. And the email, what it basically said was, hey, I'm about to get on a plane. I need the W-2s for all the employees. I'm going to work on them while I'm in the air and give them to the tax guy when I land. Thought, okay. It actually made sense. He was fairly involved in the day-to-day operations, even at that level within this organization. And his signature block, which he changed all the time, was even the recent one. Now, what I did notice when we started looking at things is the reply to address wasn't for him. Now, he was on the road. He was indeed traveling. And looking into it, sure enough, it was an attempt by a bad actor to get our W-2s. Now, where we figure they got things like his current signature block and some of the information that he was on the road was actually in his out of office reply. If you think about that, that kind of data is actually very interesting and useful for bad actors. So they get a response when they send what appears to just be junk, and that tells them that they're out of office, and they were able to do it. So we were able to duck that. But that's a really common one. Also, gift card fraud. If you haven't seen this yet, it's a great time to warn your employees about gift card fraud. This is where the bad actors will reach out and they'll say, hey, I need you to run down, go grab a bunch of gift cards. We're doing it for customers. We're doing it for employees, something along those lines. And they'll talk them into going down and getting gift cards and then scratching off the stuff on the back and sending all of the info to the bad actors under the guise of being a team lead, a director, something like that, that has some sort of authority. And pretty much every time I do a talk on this sort of subject, I'll ask the audience in an in-person talk, how many people have been targeted by gift card fraud? And I'll tell you what, almost everybody ends up raising their hand. So if you haven't seen it, make sure that people are aware of it. But this is all the BEC stuff. Now, this sounds kind of crazy, like who's really going to fall for this? Truth is, there's been about $43 billion worth of damages between even October 2013 and December 2021. I see it all the time. I hear the stories all the time. It is a very prolific way to lose money. So bad actors are oftentimes after the financial pieces like that. Now, there's also some other things they do that are maybe a little bit more indirect rather than just going with the, hey, I need you to wire $250,000 sort of emails. That is credentials. And I find that a lot of organizations, we don't put enough effort on how our credentials are being used or how we're handling them from a hygiene perspective. So you've all heard people like me come around and go, you need to have a password that's 15 characters long. It's got to have special characters. It's got to have uppercase. It's got to have lowercase. It's got to have, all this kind of stuff. And then we tell you not to write it down. There's a reason for that, though. The most important thing is that we don't reuse it. And there are some tools that can be helpful with this. Password vaults are fantastic tools. If you haven't used them or heard of them, I recommend it. We may even talk about that if there's time today. But what they do is they use this. They do credential phishing, or they'll go out and they'll pull credentials from another breach. In other words, usernames and passwords are pulled from another data breach. And they have tools that they'll use to do a process called credential stuffing. So when they're phishing for credentials, they'll send you to a fake login screen, which is oftentimes very, very realistic looking. So what they'll do is they'll take that username and password that they know, and they'll put it in a tool, and it goes out and it actually hits a whole bunch of other common services, right? So It's going to go after banks. It's going to go after retailers, including like Amazon. It's going to go after credit card companies. It's going to go to all kinds of retailers. It's an automated piece of software that's going to take that known good username and password out of a list and try it on all these places. And like, I think it was 2 years ago now, the North Face, the clothing manufacturer, they ended up having 294,000 accounts taken over through that process. It happens all the time. eBay had like 13 or 15,000 accounts taken over because we reuse our passwords. A breach happens and there it is. Or we get tricked into logging in somewhere, they steal that and they try it in other places. There's also something similar called password spraying, where basically they'll take an email address or a known username and they'll tack on a bunch of the most commonly used passwords, the 1234567 QWERTY. There's a list every year that goes out. And they'll use tools like that to go out and do these attacks, and they're actually remarkably effective as well. Now, another issue that we have out there a lot that we're seeing is supply chain and invoice fraud. Let's say they get into an email account and then start turning around and attacking the customers, the vendors, people like that. They'll send fake invoices. They'll tell them that instead of paying to this, instead of wiring to this account, we had a problem with this account. We need you to wire it to this one instead. They send it to something that the attacker controls. This is a big problem if they can get into a legitimate email account. It's bad enough when they're just pretending to be that, when they're spoofing that. But when they can get it, and they can even sometimes get in on existing conversations in the emails, that's a very effective way for them to do these attacks. So no, this is why we want to protect our email accounts so much. Okay. So this is a really common one here. Now, ransomware, if I didn't say, ransomware, if I didn't talk about that, I'd be remiss. This is a huge deal. From 2018 to 2019, the average ransom demand went from 6,000 to 84,000. Attacks were up by 40%. Now, something happened the end of 2019 that really changed things. This was the Maze ransomware group. And what they did is they went from simply encrypting all of the data within your networks, which is the typical ransomware thing, right? We encrypt all the data, take down your production, your servers, and then we charge you to get the decryption key to get it back online. Okay, awesome. What happened is we got pretty good at actually doing backups and restoring backups. And I love the way that MSPs were helping in that battle. Everything, we really, really hit these bad actors in the wallet. But what happened next is they said, okay, we're not making the money anymore. What else can we do? And they said, oh, well, you know what? Let's steal a copy of the data. And then instead of just charging to get back with the systems, we're going to charge them not to leak it on the internet. Well, this made a big, big difference. That extra bit of leverage made a huge difference. And if you're in a highly regulated industry like medical or something along those lines, that can be a real problem. So 2019, we saw this shoot up. Okay, that's the $6,000 to $84,000 demands. And then Sophos, who's a pretty reputable organization, said the average ransom payment, not demand, payment in 2022 was $812,000, but it was $1.5 million in 2023. I just saw a recent study that has it over $2 million is the average ransom payment, not even the demand, the actual payment being made, which is a huge number. Cyber insurance is great, but it's not going to cover everything you got there. And a lot of that problem is not just the taking down of the business, but having that information. We see extortion going pretty badly. Here in Florida, there was a plastic surgery clinic that got hit. And when the bad actors realized that they weren't going to get paid by the clinic was not going to pay the ransom, they went a step further and they actually started reaching out to the clients of that plastic surgery clinic and saying things like, hey, if we don't get paid for this, we're going to take your before and after plastic surgery pictures and we're putting them on the internet. And you can imagine the heat that that brought down on the clinic. I mean, the amount of pressure from people, it's a terrible thing to do to people, honestly. But you can see the amount of leverage that they're able to get through these extortion techniques. Okay. If you pay the ransom, it's still going to be very expensive. Yes, you may get back online. You hope that these bad actors who already broke into your stuff and stole things are going to be reasonable enough not to dump that data or sell it somewhere. But honestly, we're dealing with criminals. But the problem is, if we don't engage in getting them out of our systems actively, which is an expensive thing to do, let's be honest. If you don't go through and find that, the chances of reinfection are huge. Okay. There was a place in the UK, they paid a 2.4 million pound ransom, and they got everything back up and running. They were mostly stable about a month later. It was almost 30 days to the dot. The bad actors just went okay and hit the button again and re-encrypted the whole thing, because they didn't take the time and the effort to get the bad actors completely out of the system. So reinfection is a really common thing. They ended up paying them another 2.4 million pounds to try to get back. That's a lot of money right there. Now, the most common way ransomware is spread, the initial network intrusion method, is through email, through email sent to employees. There's a lot of things that happen after that, right? That's where the technical stuff gets going, where they'll do vulnerabilities within the software that are within the organization. Like they'll exploit those to get admin privileges and things like that. But initial network intrusion is almost always a simple phishing email. It's crazy. Now, some more of the impacts we saw: MGM attack. They were down for 10 days. I remember when that was happening. Like, they shut down all kinds of stuff. The slot machines were offline. All kinds of things happened. Cost them about $100 million plus. They're estimating about $10 million in legal fees. We don't believe they paid the ransom on that. Now, it did also hit Caesars Entertainment and Clorox as well. I think Caesars paid, I think it was about 15 million in a ransom. And Clorox actually had to adjust their first quarter earnings estimates because they were offline so long. It actually impacted how much they were able to produce. And it was a significant amount that they had to adjust with that. So ransomware is also a very, very ugly thing. So let's talk about the phishing thing. Why does this work, right? You would think that it's fairly easy for people to spot these and be done with them, right? We may all think also that, hey, I'm pretty smart, I'm pretty good at this. There's the issue here is, yeah, it looks simple, but these attacks are very good at understanding humans and our emotions. And these are actually very heavily emotional attacks. So deception is a big thing. You might have heard of this guy, Sun Tzu, wrote a little book a couple years ago. All warfare is based on deception. And that's what we see here. We see people that are very, very good at deception. And a lot of these scams that we see have been around for decades to generations to hundreds of years, okay? But they've been modified in a digital world. However, they still rely on the same reactions, how people react. We're emotional people. And if you think about times where we get upset, we get emotional, that's probably not the best time for us to make decisions. Okay, I am sorry here. I have lost my computer. If you're out there and you can speak to me, would you please let me know?
We still can hear you.
You can still hear me.
Yeah, the slides are blank.
Now this is going to be very tricky because I can't see my slides anymore. For some reason, I just lost all of my video on all three of my monitors. Okay.
We can't see the slide either.
You can't see
the screen turned black.
Did it? Okay. If you will, I am very sorry to have to do this, but I'm going to have to reboot this machine. It should only take a minute, and I don't really understand what happened here. But I will step away for just a moment, and I'll be back on. I'm very sorry. One moment, please.
Okay. Intermission.
Well, Joanne, are there any questions that we could start lining up?
I was actually just writing that in the chat. So yeah, if anyone has
great.
any questions about what we went over so far, just let us know. That was a funny comment in the chat.
Well, I see one question. How can someone detect fake emails and scammers? Well, there's really two levels. One, everyone should have something called email security gateway. It's really a third-party protection, so it scans your emails, and that's your first line of defense. Like Eric says, it's like 95% effective, and the rest is really up to security awareness training, right? The end user or you, the audience, is the last line of defense. And if you look at the news, it's happened to every organization, small ones, larger, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and quite a few times it's really someone clicked on something they shouldn't. Right. So it's really multi-level, right? You always use technology and email security gateway first. And the second one is the security awareness training. I'll teach you the signs to look. I think, Joanne, we have a couple slides we could send out to the audience. Look at the from, make sure it's a domain that you're expecting, right? Not like Amazon at gmail.com. So there's some common traits that you can look at. If someone says, from your bank, please click here to log in, you shouldn't do that. You should really go to your bank, like bankofamerica.com. Never click on the link. The more reputable financial institutions don't even put links anymore. They just tell you, go to our website and click on.
All right. Again, I am very sorry about that. That was crazy. I'll have to look into this. I think I lost my video card. Gotta love IT. Isn't that just a wonderful thing? Okay, but you can hear me now and see my screen again. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Awesome. Cool. Okay. So we were talking about Sun Tzu before everything in my world went dark. But yeah, deception. That's where it comes into play. Now, this is a thing that I've been seeing a lot more of lately, and that is hybrid attacks. Okay. And so what happens here is it's kind of the pinnacle of deception. They'll send an email to somebody and then they'll follow up with a text message or sometimes even a phone call that says, hey, I just sent you a message. I need you to go in and take care of this wire transfer. It's urgent. Please do this ASAP. And what happens is by combining a second type of message along with this, it reinforces the first one for folks and makes them much, much more likely to fall for these. And the way that they do this, I mean, vishing and smishing, this is the voice phishing and SMS phishing or text messaging. This is becoming very common because frankly, the tools are simple and very, very easy to use for just about anybody that wants to be a cyber villain. This is becoming much, much more popular out there. And it's being used so much. If you see this is from the CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or government agency over this. They were talking about the Conti ransomware group. And one of the things that they had was a warning about phone calls because this was happening so often. They were actually calling people. And if you think about it, right, we're talking about an average ransom payment of $2 million or more. that's probably worth making a few phone calls. So this has really kind of changed the game into how tricky they're getting about certain things. Hey, I sent you this document. I need you to review it ASAP. It's going to ask you when you open it that you need to enable some active content, but this needs to happen very quickly, or, they'll pretend to be IT staff. Go ahead and say, okay, it's all right. It's from us. And boom, what do you know? They launch something along those lines. So this deception thing is getting better and better as we move along. Now, if you remember Twitter, yeah, when they got hit, they got somebody got into their system that handled like the big accounts, right? Elon Musk, Apple, those big names like that with the blue check marks back in the day. That all started, the scam that they had was, hey, send me a Bitcoin and we'll send you back two. We're doing a promo on this. And for someone like Elon Musk, who knows? I mean, cryptocurrency may be a big thing with him and he may be willing to do that. But they got in because they basically called and said, hey, I'm with customer support or tech support, asking them to reset their passwords. They send them to a password thing, and that's how they got into Twitter. So even the big companies are prone to getting this, but these were phone calls that were made. It's crazy how this is happening. And now we have AI, which is making voice calling easier. I've done some demonstrations with this on some of the talks that I do, where I can basically, it's called speech to speech. You have a text to speech where you type something and it will read it off. And honestly, there's still some pauses and things that aren't quite right. But if I do speech to speech, when I speak it, it will then change the voice, and I can have it be a female with a British accent or anything along those lines. It's actually super handy if you make videos and things like that and you want that voiceover. But what it does is it takes all of those pauses and those inflections that are normal to you and adds them in only with the different voice. So it can become very, very easy to pretend that you are who you aren't through AI. Now, AI is a great tool for a lot of things, but understand that this kind of stuff is going to be a bit of a game changer in how they're able to do things like this and how they're going to be able to essentially scale up their operations. Okay. The other thing to be aware of is it's not just phishing, vishing, smishing, or QR code quishing or whatever it is. But what they'll do is they're actually trying to move people off to different channels of communication. In other words, it may be an email that starts and says, hey, you know what, this needs to be secure. Let's pop over to Signal, or let's do WhatsApp, or even Slack, something along those lines, because those tend not to be monitored as well as the emails are. So they'll pop in there, and that's where they actually run the scams, where it's less likely to get picked up by those filters and those things that are examining our messages, looking for attack vectors in that. So keep that in mind. There was actually, I saw a TV show, or TV commercial for WhatsApp that was out there, and it was like, oh, it's so much more secure. I mean, that stuff's even resonating in the back of somebody's head. So then somebody pops on and they say, hey, let's move over to WhatsApp. It's more secure. That person may have seen that commercial and they go, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's more secure. I saw it on TV, right? This is the kind of deception stuff that we're talking about here, the tactics they're using. And it all boils down to something called social engineering. This is from Mr. Robot, which was a very interesting show that used real hacker techniques and stuff. But this was the lead character. He said, I've never found it hard to hack most people. If you listen to them and watch them, their vulnerabilities are like a neon sign screwed into their heads. I said earlier, attackers know how we're going to react in certain situations. So they make sure to drive us in these situations where we're going to have these reactions. Ultimately, emotions and intense pressure and a sense of urgency are what make this happen. Okay. We saw big spikes back in the pandemic because people were stressed out already. This is the way that they play these games. Now, our brains are cool, right? They really are. If you've ever seen, there's a show out there called Brain Games. It's a phenomenal way to look at how this stuff kind of happens. But our brains They interpret, present, and filter things for us, right? So the reality that we get, the things we smell, taste, all that kind of good stuff, it's not always reality. It's a filter version of that. For example, if you wear glasses, how many times during the day do you see the glasses in your field of view? You don't. Your brain actually filters that stuff out. You never notice it. Same with your nose. If you're looking around, you don't see that. Like, this is the stuff that happens. They can emotionally manipulate it so we don't necessarily see the games that they're playing on the backside. So keep that in mind. I love talking about this. If you guys want to connect, I'll have my email address up later. I love to talk about the psychology, the deep dives in here. Daniel Kahneman's System 1, System 2 thinking, stuff like that. Now, the thing about social engineering is they use those emotions. The most common ones I see are greed, curiosity, self-interest, urgency, and fear will almost always be in there, and then helpfulness, okay? Urgency and fear. I've never seen a phishing attack that comes in that says, I need you to wire $250,000 whenever you feel like it. Okay, it's never going to be like that. There's always a reason for it. And I've seen them really crank up the fear level on people quite a bit. So understand that these are the kinds of things that we want to watch for. And if you take nothing else out from this, if you can teach people, if we can share the message to people that when you get an email, a text message, or a phone call that elicits a very strong emotional response, rather than do what they want you to do, which is jump right in and try to fix this thing while you're under pressure, we need to have people take a deep breath. We need to step back and we need to look at it very critically. We need to then cue ourselves to do that, as opposed to just taking that step and letting them lead us down the path, which leads to the actions that they want. So if you take nothing else away, strong emotional response, take a deep breath, look at it more critically. So defending ourselves, yeah, watch those emotions, all right? It doesn't always mean that it's a social engineering attack, but it is a key part of them. Trust your instincts when they tell you something's not right, okay? I told that story earlier about the gal who called me up and said, I'm probably wasting your time, but this feels weird for me. They're asking, the boss is asking for these W-2s. Had she talked herself out of calling me, just decided, you know what? No, I don't like doing that. It's probably nothing. We talk ourselves out of our instincts all the time. I would have been in a whole different world as far as that information being leaked and probably my tax returns. So understand that we have to listen to our emotions. We're amazing creatures when it comes to our instincts and intuition. Don't talk ourselves out of it. In my decades of doing this, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to someone afterwards and I've been like, okay, so explain to me how this happened and why this happened. Now, I'm not one to place blame on people. I'm really not, but it's important to understand why. And I can't tell you how many times in my career somebody said, you know what, it felt weird, but I went ahead and clicked on it, or I went ahead and did it anyways, but I always kind of felt like it was weird. We need to listen to that when it comes to our emotions. We also need to protect our credentials. I talked about the password reuse problems. That's a very important key thing here. Consider using a password vault. There's a number of very good ones out there that are fantastic. They help you generate a unique password. I love them. I've been using them for years, different ones. My family uses them. It actually saves us a lot of trouble when it's time to sit down and come up with that password. We never love that when it pops up and says, hey, it's time to reset your password, right? We go, ugh. So what do? We add an exclamation point or another number or change it to 2024, right? They know that trick, all right? Password vaults are great. The key is you need to have a very strong passphrase to get into it. Something like the squirrel is wearing purple shoes or something nonsensical like that. Throw in, change up a couple of things, eyes or ones or whatever, but also enable multi-factor authentication on all of your accounts, especially a password manager, but your social media accounts, all of those accounts, we should be using multi-factor authentication. So that way, if they do somehow get a hold of your username and password, it's very difficult for them to get past that because they also need a code that's generated on your phone, or, you know, and they may send you they may try to trick you into that as well. There's ways to get around that. But like the text messages we get from the bank and stuff, there's actually physical keys, like UB keys, which I'm a big fan of. They're these little USB keys like this that plug into your computer. There's problems with that if you happen to forget one behind, you know, leave one behind when you're traveling, something like that. But look into MFA options, multi-factor authentication. It's a fantastic thing. I've seen a lot of people's social media accounts getting taken over and used to attack friends and family. It's a bad thing. We also don't want them in our email. We want to educate people. And it's a cyclical process here, right? We want to do a baseline test. You want to train the people. You want to educate them. And not just on phishing, but also the dangers of password reuse and things like that. This goes much, much further than just anti-phishing training these days. You want to simulated phish the people. Now, there's a lot of questions about that sometimes, and people don't understand why. The reason behind this is not to trick them. That's not the goal of this. The goal is to take something and actually give them hands-on with these simulated phishes. So think of it like a college class, right? You get the professor tells you what to do. Okay, great. But you go and do the lab, and how much do you learn from the lab as opposed to just the coursework, right? This is the lab portion. So you send them to them. If they mess up, you know, you don't beat them up over it, not by any means. It's okay. You may want to give them some remedial training or something along the ways. That's best practices. We're talking like a couple of minutes or something, not a whole training slew. But we want to make sure that they understand where the mistake was made so they don't do it again. We also want to praise those people that actually report phishing emails, and we want to make them feel good about it. If they report a good one, the simulated ones, we go, thank you very much. We need to have this to be a positive thing. But then you want to see the results, and you want to watch how this works, and you'd be amazed at how quickly, I'm going to show you a graph here in a minute, but how quickly people can respond to this, learn how to spot these when they're remembering to look for this kind of stuff. So that's kind of the 4 steps that we like to use here. The key messaging you want to share: be aware of your emotions, consider using that password vault. Don't reuse passwords or even very similar ones across accounts or stores. Always check those links and URLs. When you click on something and you're going to go log in, make sure you're at Microsoft's page. Make sure you're at one of those, and enable multi-factor authentication wherever possible. Now, I told you I was going to show you this graph here real quick. This was very, very recent. This is a 2024 Phishing by Industry report. The average click rate we had, now this was millions of people. What did we end up having on this one? It was millions upon, 11.9 million users. We tracked them from start to finish. Keep in mind, 65,000 customers. We have a lot of data to go off of, but the initial click rate for those folks last year, about 34% click rate, because they weren't thinking about it. They weren't looking for it. Within 3 months, 90 days, it was down to 18.9% and down to 4.6% at the end of a year. You can make a huge difference in this human risk piece simply by doing high quality education and using the tools that are going to be provided. You heard earlier, this is going to be provided in the security packages and the packages here that are being provided by Victor and his team. Actually use it. Take advantage of it. You can make a huge, huge difference. So having said that, I know I ended up a couple of minutes behind due to that reboot, and I sincerely apologize for that. But here we are. I would love to chat with anyone. You want to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You want to reach out to me in email. I love to talk about this stuff. We can dig a little bit further, but I also love to hear questions and comments. So do we have any questions out there at this point? I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can kind of get into the Q&A and stuff. Well, let's see. Looking at the chat here. Yeah, talking about social engineering. If you have any questions, this is a great time. And you know what? We're small enough. I'm not sure. I believe you may be able to unmute and ask the question. Otherwise, let's pop it into chat. Otherwise, Joanna, Victor, do you have anything that really stood out to you in here? Things that maybe you hadn't thought of before? Don't be shy.
I mean, the stats were astounding. It's amazing how it's increasing every single year, and how profitable
Yeah.
actors are.
Yeah, I think a lot of people they misunderstand or underestimate like the sheer amount of money that's being made through these kinds of attacks and through cybercrime in general. Um, in a lot of ways, we've seen the volume of this go up so much, and the tools that they use. Now we know that we have tools. That's fantastic. But the bad actors also have tools to help do this sort of stuff. And their tools are making it easier and easier for less and less technical and educated people to be getting into the cybercrime gang. So that's what these are now. It's not usually one or two people, it's a gang, a group of people. And they have developers that are over here that actually develop the software. Like ransomware's moved into a ransomware as a service model in most cases. So you have your developers, they're super smart. They develop this stuff, they come up with it. And then you have basically your street level dealers that go out and generate these attacks. They try to get people to open the links and do that. And in many cases, it's a profit sharing model. So we typically see a 30-70 split. You have the developers get about 30% of whatever the earnings are from one of these attacks. And the people that actually carry out the attacks get about 70% of those earnings. Okay. But this allows it to scale. These folks, they have dashboards where they can go in and see who's clicked on things, who hasn't, who's made actions, who's done infections and all this kind of stuff. They can actually monitor it just like the tools that we have today to monitor our other stuff there, right? They can see how effective it is. And all of this is being provided to people that are maybe not very technically astute, at least not enough to be writing the ransomware. But they are good social engineers and scammers. So it's amazing how much we're talking about here. Now in Q&A, yeah, we do have a question here about password managers. Now, I can't recommend any brands. That's just, kind of that's just not something we do. I will tell you that there's several of them out there. If you Google for password managers, you will absolutely see some that stand out from the other ones. Victor, is this a service that you all provide and help
So
folks with?
we recommend like Dashlane for business. So I think the advantage for a corporate or an organization is a great example is we have a bookkeeper, we have a CFO, an accountant. All of them have access to my bank accounts, but none of them know what the password is.
Yeah.
Right? Because bookkeepers have a tendency to, just rotate. I used to have to reset everyone's password because it's shared all the time, right? So with a business class password manager, they never see it. When they leave, that's okay. I may switch it, but I may not. Right, but it's they never see it. They just use their password manager. It automatically logs them in. There's always two-factor, right? So that's another level of protection. So that's great. We also offer a product for if you want to offer to your entire population, right? Your employees, everyone should have, either it should be protected by a password manager or they should have a unique password, right? And unique login with MFA.
Yeah, I love them. Like I said, I use them here in the house with the family, and my wife does the bills, but I need to get in the account sometimes, and we share between each other with the password. So if she does log in sometime and it says, "Hey, you know what? You need to update your password or whatever," she just goes, "Okay, cool," generates a new one. And then when I go in there, I had no idea it happened, but I've never seen the password, so I don't care. I mean, honestly, under threat of death, I probably couldn't tell you what 2/3 of my passwords are because I've never seen them. But most of them work in the same way, in the same general way. Um, but yeah, they're an amazing thing to have. And I see you also asked about using passwordless login. I like that. There's different ways to do that, and there's different risks with every kind you have. There are, ones like Okta or things like that that do single sign-on providers. There's also ways to do it through, again, like I had mentioned, YubiKeys before, like these kinds of keys using Windows Hello and some things like that, where you can actually use physical tokens to log in. It's something that you have to weigh the risks on versus the benefits for your individual infrastructure and your use. Victor, I don't know, is there a certain type of passwordless login that you are working with right now or suggest to folks, or you kind of like you want to see what they're doing first?
Usually it's the use case, but we use YubiKeys here. Like
Beautiful.
my dash lane, since it's the keys to my castle,
Yeah.
it's protected by MFA and a YubiKey, right? So I have to, but like you said, I've forgotten at home a few times and I can't do any work during the day. Either it's wait till the evening or drive back home. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And something to remember about that is, sure, you can go ahead and set up the alternate password method, right? Or the alternate MFA. But if you're setting it back to just a text message, in the grand scheme of things, you're only as strong as your weakest link on that. So it is something that you want to do. And you want to be careful with those, because I too have left town with my wife's car and not my set of keys, and been
Right.
sitting out there like, oh man, like, okay, what do we do now? And had to have them enable like an app based one to allow me to do my work while I was on the road that time. It does happen, but ultimately it's that security versus friction sort of discussion that we still have. So,
Right.
all right. Any other questions? Don't be shy. I love that, Claire. You mean it isn't safe sharing my password of any kind with anyone? Yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah, I didn't know if I should answer that.
Yeah.
The answer is no.
Yeah, the answer is absolutely not. Keep that in mind too. I mean, like I said in that Twitter example there, one of the common things they'll do is they'll pretend to be an IT service or an IT person, and they'll call up and they'll say something along the lines of, "Hey, we just need to check that your password's working. Can you go ahead and type it in this portal to make sure it works?" Or they'll ask you to give it up. They should never ask you for your passwords, period.
I just had just last week, it was, I guess would be called smishing, but they someone almost got me. I got a text and it had my first name, and then it was asking me to verify my phone number, and Victor Lou is my boss, and at the end it said his name. And I was like weirded out by it, so I sent him like the screenshot on Teams, and he was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, that's not me." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like, as far as like how you mentioned, like there's cheap tools and services
Yeah.
now for that, because they had to pull from somewhere that I work for him. I thought it was legit at first, and then I was like, oh wow.
Hey, LinkedIn is a great place for hackers to build
Yeah.
basically an org chart on organizations these days. It's very easy to figure out who reports to whom.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. Well, if there's no more questions, again, I would be happy to talk to someone, email, connect on LinkedIn, either way, and continue conversations if you were
I think we
shy.
just got one more.
Oh,
Sorry.
great.
In the Q&A, how frequently should users be trained on this yearly?
Okay. All right. That's a great question, because I see a lot of places do this wrong. Right now, in a lot of organizations, they do like annual training. And I want you to really think about how effective you think that would be. The preference here and what we found works the best is shorter trainings, but have them more often, and hopefully something that relates to that time of year. So instead of doing one 60-minute training per year, why not do 5 minutes a month, or maybe 15 minutes a quarter, if you will? You talk about tax scams as you go into the first quarter, as you're going into the fourth quarter. Let's talk about how these attacks, these scams work around the holiday stuff. And even if it's personal to people, if we can relate it to people, they'll be more interested in it. But they're still going to learn the same things that are going to turn out to help you within an organization. I love seeing people do just a 5 or 10 minute training, maybe monthly. Make it fun. We have some really fun stuff in our mod store, like in our training stuff. We have some really funny stuff in there, and it doesn't take long, and it really gets people's attention, so it doesn't feel bad. But you should be doing your training at least quarterly, and you should be doing the simulated phishing at least monthly. That's where we see the best bang for the buck.
I'm not sure if this is gonna get cut off at 3 o'clock, but I don't think we have any more questions right now.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And again, always happy to answer questions. Do you want to close it out there, Joanna?
Well, thank you for teaching all of us on this. We are going to reach out today we have 20 people in here, and we're going to pick a random winner for the gift card. We're going to reach out today. So we'll email you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.